So you've engaged in problem solving, and you've now balanced the power. And you think that you have invented an option that meets your interests and meets theirs better than their alternative does. So you're probably on your way to an agreement. But what if they still say no? What if the more you push for your idea, the more they push back? What do you do in that situation? How do you close the negotiation? Think about it this way for a moment. You're over here. This is where you want them to be. This is your position. They're over here. This is where they are. And when you're over here, what you're saying to them is, come over to my position. Come over to where I want you to be. But that may not be so easy for them. If you put yourself in their shoes for a moment, it's not so easy for them to go over to where you want them to be, because it's like there's a big chasm, like the Grand Canyon, filled with anxiety, dissatisfaction, unmet needs. It's not so easy for them to go to where you want them to be. What this requires is for you for a moment to leave where your thinking is, and that's not easy, and for a moment to go and start where their thinking is. Start from their position and build them a golden bridge over that chasm of their dissatisfaction. Make it as attractive as possible for them to say yes. Make that bridge as golden as you possibly can. Let me give you an example. There was once a negotiation between a large multinational company and the owner of perhaps the most successful steakhouse in the United States. The company was interested in purchasing this steakhouse and turning it into a chain. Well, I had a conversation with the acquisitions negotiator, and he told me about how difficult this negotiation was, because he sat down with the owner of the steakhouse, and the more they talked, and the company made a very generous offer, and he said he wanted more, and the conversation went on for weeks and months, and finally the acquisitions negotiator was about to throw up his hands and go home. There was no use. Couldn't negotiate with the owner. Couldn't satisfy him. Just before he left, though, he thought, maybe there's something I've forgotten. Maybe there's something I've left out. Because what we tend to do in negotiation is we often think it's just a question of money. The acquisitions negotiator asked himself, what have I left out? What have I missed out on? He went back and talked to the owner of the steakhouse and found out that the owner wasn't so sure that he wanted to sell the restaurant. Why? Because he liked being the owner of this restaurant. He liked the feeling of control and autonomy that it gave him. He liked the feeling of recognition that it gave him as he went from table to table every night and everyone said, that's the owner of the restaurant. And he wasn't so sure that he wanted to be the employee of a big multinational company. So the acquisitions negotiator said, aha, we've uncovered some unmet needs, some unmet interests. Let's see if we can invent some options. So he went back to the owner and said, well, this would be rather unusual for a multinational company like ours and a single individual to form a joint venture. But what if we form a joint venture so that you won't work for us? You'll be the president of the joint venture. You'll have the autonomy and the control that you want. You'll have the recognition that you want. You'll be the president. And we'll buy 80% of the stock in this company from you. You'll own 20%. You'll be the president. You'll run things. And the longer you stay, the more we'll pay for your 20% of the stock if you want to sell it back to us, because we want to create an incentive for you to stay as long as you can so that we can learn from your management experience and turn this into a successful chain. Well, once the acquisitions negotiator framed the solution that way, the owner agreed. It met his interests. He got a fair price, a generous price. He got the autonomy and recognition that he wanted. That is the power of building the other side a golden bridge and of reaching a mutually satisfying agreement through this kind of negotiation. Satisfying agreement. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Before concluding, I'd like to leave you with a note about ethics and negotiation. Negotiation is often associated in the public mind with various forms of deception or manipulation. And I've always found this interesting because in the 2 decades that I've been working in this field, working with some of the most successful negotiators in business, in law, in diplomacy, the thing that I've found that they value most is actually their reputation for honesty and fair dealing. Now, why would this be? Let me tell you a story to illuminate this. I have a friend. His name was Ambassador Carden. He was a British diplomat, and he was the British ambassador to the United Nations at the time of the 1967 Middle East War. And it was his job after the war to fashion the UN resolution to decide what should happen in the Middle East to resolve that conflict. It's known as UN Resolution 242. It's perhaps the most famous, one of the most famous resolutions in UN history. They're still talking about implementing it today. Well, it was a very difficult negotiation to try to bring all the parties together in agreement. And there was one holdout, and that was the Soviet Union. But after 3 weeks of arduous negotiation, Ambassador Carden decided that he needed to bring this to a vote. There was a lot of pressure from his foreign ministry and from the world generally to bring this to a vote. But it was a risk because the Soviet Union had a veto. 10 minutes before the vote, the Soviet ambassador approached him in the corridor and said, "Ambassador Carden, I'd like to ask you a favor. I would like to ask you to postpone that vote by 2 weeks." And Carden could see that he had built a very fragile coalition in favor of the amendment, that coalition could easily fragment in 2 weeks. So he had a lot of pressure on him to bring this to a vote. So he said, "I'm sorry, Ambassador Kuznetsov, but everyone knows where we stand on this resolution. I think we're going to have to proceed with the vote." And Ambassador Kuznetsov said, "Ambassador Carden, you must have misunderstood me. I'm asking you as a personal favor if you will postpone that vote by 2 weeks." And Carden told me that as soon as he heard the word personal in there, he knew that no matter how much pressure he was going to get from his own foreign ministry, no matter what the chances were of his coalition fracturing, he had to grant Kuznetsov his wish. Now, why was this? Because Kuznetsov, even though he represented a country, the Soviet Union, that had very little reputation in the international domain for honesty and fair dealing, Kuznetsov personally had that reputation among his diplomatic colleagues. And if he was taking his reputation, something that takes an entire lifetime to build, and putting it on the line, then Carden knew that he had to grant him his wish. So he did. 2 weeks went by. They're having the vote in the UN Security Council chamber. Going around, every country is voting in favor of the UN Resolution 242. The last to vote is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Ambassador Kuznetsov raises his hand and votes in favor of the resolution. And sure enough, rather than using the 2 weeks to try to meddle, to try to destroy the agreement, he'd use the 2 weeks to go back to Moscow and persuade his superiors there to vote in favor of the resolution. But think about this for a moment. He never would have been able to buy those 2 weeks if he didn't have that reputation. If you have a reputation for honesty and fair dealing, the other side will give you the benefit of the doubt. They will believe you. You will have credibility. They will tell you information about their interests that they wouldn't otherwise share with you. You will have a much better chance of inventing options for mutual gain, of getting all the gold off the table. If you don't have that reputation, then people will either refuse to deal with you because you have a reputation for lying or manipulating, or if they are forced to deal with you, they'll deal with you at arm's length. And think about this for a moment. There's no question that through deception or manipulation you can gain a short-term advantage in any negotiation. Once. But think about this. You have thousands of negotiations ahead of you. It would be like a company taking all its capital and spending it on a single transaction, because that's what your reputation is. It's your capital. And that's why I think The most successful negotiators I know, why they value that reputation, that's their most valuable asset. In a negotiation, you have your word. Their most valuable asset is their reputation for honesty and fair dealing. It's not only the right thing to do, it produces the best results. We've talked about 7 principles for negotiating effectively, even in the most difficult situations. I'd like to leave you with one lesson that unites all 7 principles, and that's the lesson of becoming a reflective negotiator. Think about this for a moment. We say we negotiate, most of us, 50% of our time. If we were swimming 50% of our time, we would probably be in the Olympics. And the question is, as good as we might be at the art of negotiation, why aren't we all in the negotiation Olympics? I think the answer to that question is that when we swim, we always have part of our attention focused on the process of swimming, on our strokes, on our technique, so that we're continually improving the way in which we swim. When we negotiate, however, we have almost all of our attention focused not on the process, but on the outcome, on the dollars and cents, on the terms and conditions, on the substance of the agreement. And if we can learn to spend a little bit of our time and attention on the process of going to the balcony, of stepping to the other person's side, of focusing on interests and inventing options and using criteria, of developing a good alternative and building them a golden bridge. If we can focus on the process of doing those 7 things and continually improve our negotiations, continually learn from each negotiation, then we can end up as champions in the negotiation Olympics. I hope you will be able to apply these 7 principles with profit and satisfaction in your negotiations. I want to wish you all the best, and I want to encourage you to go for the gold.